Mike Matters.
Everybody's interested in those questions. It's just framing them in the right way and making them beautiful.
Imaginary time is like another direction in space.
I'm a physicist. You go where the data goes. I mean, are we the only sentient beings in the universe?
Hi, I'm Andrei, and welcome to a new episode of Mike Matters. Today we're going to expand the discussion into about the digital world we live in and how we're handling digital transformation and this kind of body-mind duality that is increasingly strong in nowadays life. And we are here today with Professor Bernd Resch. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Perfect, thank you.
Welcome. I'm actually gonna read your bio because it's quite impressive, and I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Bernd Resch is a full professor of Geo-social AI at ITU in Linz and a visiting scholar at Harvard University in the US. He has his PhD in the area of life geography, real-time monitoring of environmental geoprocesses, which he got it from the University of Salzburg and MIT. His research interests revolves around understanding cities as complex systems through analyzing a variety of digital data sources, focusing on developing machine learning algorithms to analyze human-generated data, like social media posts or physiological measurements. I hope I didn't miss anything. He's here in Romania at the invitation of the Austrian Cultural Forum for a series of discussion around his project, which is called Digital Networks of Conspiracy. And we're very lucky to have him here at Mike Matters to explore this kind of tension point, I think, between what predictable systems and human behavior, where these tension points happen. So, Professor, welcome to the mic.
Thanks for having me. Thanks a lot.
I'm gonna start with a difficult question, actually, and it's something that is kind of I've been thinking a lot about, and in the context of your talk yesterday, and also considering how we're handling all this kind of digital data. And if I understand correctly, Geo-social AI is sort of trying to make sense of our online and physical behavior to sort of predict what a million people will be doing tomorrow.
Absolutely.
More or less. And in this context, would you say that agency and free will sort of fall in a margin of error in this kind of analysis, or is this kind of Geo-social AI sort of proving that human behavior is just the result of very social, rigid norms?
So what we do is that we generally try to make sense of data. That's a bit of a data science-y approach that I'm putting out here. So we have data there, we can see which patterns we can detect. And that's the first goal, so to say. How this operates in societal norms is a bit of a different question. Meaning, why, first of all, do people sit down at 11 at the night and post on social media? That's a psychological process that is hard to decipher in the end. And then the question is, how is the societal process working that we are rewarded on the internet, sharing our thoughts, and like this generating a dynamic, so to say, that's a bit of an interplay between psychological processes and the societal reward and acknowledgement of that.
Okay, so it's not a definitive answer, but it's rather an interplay between these two sides of the story, the individual gratification and the way it manifests in a social structure end of the day.
I would say so. There are several reasons for posting on the internet, and one of them is this triggering of the reward system. Basically, you're releasing dopamine if you get likes, if you get a friendship request approved, if you get positive feedback on your post, if you have new comments and a lively discussion on your website and so on, right? So that's the reward system that is triggered. That's one thing. And the other one is that we feel somewhat accommodated to some degree on social media because we seemingly create a friendship circle, or at least a circle of acquaintances that helps us feeling, let's say, as being part of something larger.
Okay. And going back to the research and what Geo-social AI is, what is Geo-social AI besides the definition that we can read online, and how would you explain it to your daughters maybe?
Yeah, there is a bit of a history to that. So I'm a computer scientist by education, and for me at some point, computer science was a little bit too technical. It's basically shifting bits and bytes around behind the scenes, which was too much into only text, so to say. And then during my PhD, I shifted towards geoinformatics, which is basically trying to analyze real-world processes, geographic processes about the Earth, through computer science methods. And then, so that's geoinformatics. That's let's say a discipline at the intersection of geography and computer science. And now what I want to do with geosocial artificial intelligence is that we research artificial intelligence methods to understand geographic and social processes. And this could be human movement, human behavior, but also we want to get an insight into the world, into processes, without being there. So it's not an in situ measurement in social media, for example, but it's a remote observation, so to say, that we take.
Okay, and what kind of data are you using in modeling this kind of analysis?
So why we also call it geosocial is because we use social sensing data. That is a term that has established itself somewhat well in science over the past 10, 15 years. The idea is people contribute to the internet, Web 2.0, prosumers, right? That would be the keywords. So people generate data on the internet. And we do this every day. We leave traces in digital space. Only by, moving through digital space physically and carrying our phone. Like, for example, the mobile phone provider would know where we are. We post on the internet. We post on social media. We conceive forum entries on newspapers and so on, right? Online newspapers. And all these data say something about the world. Yes, of course, about the person, but this is not what we're interested in. We're no psychologists, and we don't want to know how a single person works, but what these masses of data tell us about the world. And this could be social media posts, this could be newspaper entries and forum posts as well. This could be physiological data, like all the fitness watches and so on that we're wearing. This could be mobile phone data, everything that's generated through our actions basically as being citizens.
And what about the geographical data?
So the geographic position is inherent to most of the data we're using. So there is a saying that has been semi-proven in science over the past 20 years that 80% of all data that exist in the world have a geographic reference. So for example, if you say I measured 27 degrees Celsius, it's worthless if I don't have the spatial context, like where it's measured, and yes, of course, also when it's measured. But the geographical context is super important for interpreting those data. And for social media posts, for example, many people share where they are at the time of posting. So they say, I'm just in Bucharest at this nice podcast studio and we're recording. Or they say, I just observed flooding in the city of XYZ in a country. Or I'm just visiting this and this museum, right? So this could be implicit or explicit geographic references that people share on, for example, social media.
I was actually curious if you use this kind of explicit data, people stating where they are, or do you infer it from the content of the postings, or if you take some metadata from the posts as well?
Yeah, all of the above, basically.
All of the above.
So sometimes people share even their GNSS positions, GPS positions, basically, along with their posts. So then we have an exact position. Sometimes they say where they are, and these could be different granularities. There is a difference if I say I'm at this and this statue versus I'm at a certain, building, for example, like the University of Bucharest, or whether I'm in Bucharest or whether I'm Romania, right? So there is very different granularities in references. So either people post about it and say where they are. Yes, we can also infer, like, for example, a concert of, but that's not what we do so far a lot because that's quite a heavy NLP task, natural language processing. Because in the end, what people post on social media is usually a bit of a, jibber-jabber, or let's say it's at least mostly not grammatically correct sentences. So you need a lot of contextual knowledge and human interpretation to actually understand what a person is saying.
To decode and you imply this kind of decoding algorithm when you analyze the data, or you just try to get the most important aspect of the messages?
So mostly we go for explicit mentions because that's the easier part, and that's not an easy one at all because there can always be different uncertainties. For example, people can refer to a location in situ or remote. So I'm just here, or I remember my last vacation, for example, in Paris, for example, right? So they would be referring to a distant location. And then there is also a temporal component, like past, present, future, where they refer to, again, a current event, I'm just here, or past or present, I was there or I will be there. So that's a bit the hard part of deciphering that. And that's enough of a challenge for now already for us. So the implicit references are still a bit harder to extract.
Okay, I can only imagine. And why do you do that? What's the end game? What's the actual use case for this kind of analysis?
So we started all this a bit from a domain perspective. So we know that some domains like disaster management, for example, are not fully optimally operating at this moment, let's put it like this. For example, disaster management is working very strongly based on remote sensing data. So for example, you take images with a satellite. But then the satellite images have a few caveats. So for example, the satellite is orbiting around the Earth, and you cannot take pictures of any point in the Earth at any point in time, because you need to wait until the satellite is coming over this area of interest again. Exactly. And this could take you a day or 2 or 3 sometimes, right? That's one thing, the temporal resolution. Second thing is spatial resolution. When you look onto the Earth from like 10 kilometers above, there is a limit, a physical limit to what the camera actually can capture. And then you only have a remotely sensed impression, mostly a visual one, that basically represents your phenomenon. For example, a flooding event. And now what we do is we continuously harvest a stream of data, and that's freely available on the internet, social media posts, for example, like from X or other microblogging platforms. And like this, we at least address some of those issues which I just mentioned with remote sensing data. So first of all, it's real-time data, because those data come in as a stream. The second thing is we have in situ data, people reporting what they see in front of them. And this could be they say things about, I don't know, that's a flooded area. They take pictures that we can use to analyze. And like this, we get a bit of a different understanding. And not saying that it's either or, it's better or worse, but both of these methods and data sources have their pros and cons.
It's a different way of looking at the same thing, basically.
It's an addition, yes.
Can you give any kind of real-world example where this kind of analysis was used and what was the outcome?
Yeah, so the fun part is that it's actually quite much transferable. So in disaster management, we can delineate which geographic areas are affected by a natural disaster, like which areas have been flooded, which areas have felt an earthquake, and so on. Then we can also transfer this to epidemiology, like how is a contagious disease spreading in space and time. Migration movements, of course, urban planning. So that's the beauty of the methodology and the data source, that it's actually quite generic. And if I would go into a specific example, I would say disaster management has been, working rather well, because we still talk about science, right? There are many research challenges we haven't solved so far. But for example, with disaster management, we have had very good experiences, for example, delineating damaged areas after an earthquake, or delineating flooded areas after a pluvial flood, for example. So this is working pretty well at the moment.
And did it help in any way the response, or at least there were done simulations how it would help this kind of analysis, the response in case of such disasters?
Yeah, we don't work so much with simulations usually, but we work with real data, but scenarios. That's a bit of a difference. And what we do is that we work a lot with disaster management agencies. This could be NGOs, this could be then rescue organizations, the Red Cross, Johanniter, THW, all different kinds. Of course, the UN and Doctors Without Borders and so on. And what they want to know is they want to get a very quick overview of the situation. What we deliver is usually not 100% accurate, but at least it gives you a very good impression what has happened there, and then you try to design your disaster action.
So in a sense, it gives you a direction, but not the magnitude, the exact magnitude of what is happening? Or did I understood correctly when you say it's not 100% accurate?
It could be a magnitude, but the issue is that it's not complete. So we get a general picture. For example, if we have 700 posts about a flooded area, we get a pretty good impression of what's happening on site. But this does not mean we can cover every single damaged building. like you could do, for example, with drone imagery, right? When you fly over an area with drones and collect images, you can do a pre-post analysis, and you can see exactly which buildings have been damaged or flooded and so on.
So it's a matter of resolution, basically.
It's a matter of resolution and also the coverage of the area.
Coverage in what sense?
We do not cover every single point.
Okay.
That's
Yep.
what I tried to explain before.
Okay, and in which direction do you see this going in the future? I mean, based on your experience so far, what would be the potential for this kind of technology, and would it overcome this kind of limitations like this resolution part, or where is it going?
So in disaster management, our strongest advocation is actually for going digital, because how disaster management is still happening in many cases is that people are printing out a map, putting it to the wall, 3 by 2 meters, and then start drawing on there, like flooded areas and broken bridges and evacuations and everything, right? But that raises a lot of questions about information sharing and information quality. Now, what we want to do is to say, look, if you don't use the paper on the wall, but the computer, you can get a real-time insight into the situation. And that's what we're practicing with rescue organizations. So, for example, 2 years ago, we had a quite large-scale disaster management exercise that I coordinated with 900 action forces in 4 areas. And the basic scenario was a large-scale flooding, and that had a number of effects. So one was flooded houses in a city outside of Salzburg. Another one was people being caught in the river by the floods. Another one was a collapsed building in the center of Salzburg. And the fourth one was a train derailment. And each of those were real, right? Like outside in the world. For example, for the collapsed building use case, we used a building that was just demolished for being renovated, more or less, right? So we prepared it, and then we had people buried below the debris, and then we had rescue dogs searching for them, and so on and so on. And the same with the train derailment, right? The train was really derailed, so to say, and then we had a CBRN unit there because it was, at least in the scenario, the train was carrying chemicals. And like this, what we do is we write these kinds of playbooks, and they are very detailed. Like every few minutes or every minute, we put new information to the disaster managers. And this could either be the mayor of a village has called and said the bridge has collapsed. Okay, how do we deal with that? Or we give them a new layer of social media information to say, look, new developments are coming in, please react to those. And that's quite a real-world situation, actually. It feels very real, especially the disaster managers. Like after 3 hours of exercise, they're drained, basically. It's a very hard thing to do.
I can only imagine. I mean, and I think it's a good training for them that you can kind of simulate this kind of developments in real time, and just like it would happen in the field. And what were the results of this exercise? What kind of feedback did you get?
So the feedback, and I can share also the video that's on YouTube, which is a bit of a summary of the exercise, is that everybody was thinking it's very helpful. And that's the regional disaster managers, that's the rescue organizations, and so on. So using artificial intelligence methods to analyze these new kinds of data, which is drone images, which is in situ reports, even we sent out people to really take pictures from the event and so on, helicopter rescues. And of course, there's social media information that we generate. Everything was really helpful in its way, and combining that gives them a better overview of what happens in the situation. Having said that, it's still difficult to implement into the real world. So disaster management is a super stressful process. Like when people are there, they're basically sweating blood. And then many pieces of information come in that they have to deal with in real time and then take action. And it's a very responsible job as well, obviously. So what happens most of the time is that people revert back to mechanisms that they know very well. And that's painting on the wall, as I mentioned before. So going into this digital age and really using digital tools requires a lot of training, first of all, but also trust in the tools and the information we provide. And that's still a pathway we need to take.
And I think it's also a lot of responsibilities on your shoulders as researchers dealing with these kind of hypothetical scenarios and developing tools to mitigate these kind of disasters. How do you feel about that?
So what we do is we create proof of concept. And of course it has to work because it's totally detached from reality, then nobody will use it and nobody will find it valuable. But on the other side, we do not create products, right? We would not create a product that is certified and then we would be liable if the information is not correct or so. It's more like trying out things with innovation-oriented rescue managers, and they would then tell us what they need and why our algorithms, why our outputs are not accurate enough, where they're not trustworthy, where they're not usable, perhaps they are too complex sometimes. So this dialogue is basically building bridges from both sides. We say we can provide you with AI methods that analyze data and provide you with information, and they tell us exactly what they need. And that's a bit of an iterative process where we develop together, so to say, to meet in the middle somewhere, so to say.
And if we were to sort of take another step back and look at your, I'm not talking about legal liability or responsibility in the accurate sense of the word, but rather sort of like more responsibility and stuff that keeps you up at night. So if we take another step back and look at how you feel about the data you're analyzing, because you're basically taking the more or less intimate thoughts, because we still keep thinking that the social media posts are an intimate part of us. And you take these kind of intimate parts of people and you crunch them into data. And you never know where this kind of research will go in the future and who might use it and how. So how do you deal with that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a pretty broad question, and that would fill another podcast, I guess. So I'm going to start like this just to be explicit. We are only using publicly available data. So we are not jumping into private communication channels, for example, right? If you send a message, like an SMS message to somebody, we do not see that. We do not see, for example, WhatsApp channels or whatever, right? So that's definitely the case. What we analyze is public posts, for example, on blogging platforms like Blue Sky, like Mastodon, like Twitter, now X, and so on. So everybody who shouts out into the world should hopefully know that everybody can listen to that as well, because that's what all of us, when we sign up to these platforms, have signed in the terms and conditions.
Agree. Yeah.
Yeah, we tick the box, exactly. That's not an excuse for anything, and we cannot do anything, but that's at least a disclaimer to say we use only information that basically everybody can view by going to the website of one of these social media platforms. Now, the other thing is that there are a lot of ethical concerns, and they are very broad. First thing is re-identification. That's mostly one of the ethical and privacy concerns. If we have, 15 posts by an anonymous user, could we infer from the data they post who they are? And sometimes you can, right? You start seeing that they post about the same location, about the same topic, but then you would have to take a very strong effort to actually identify them, meaning marrying this with other data sources. Credit card records, census data, where they're working, where they're living, which friends they have, like for instance from Facebook and so on, right? So that's always the question. Can the person be re-identified with a low or reasonable effort? And that's obviously a very soft statement. So there is no clear limit to that. But having said that, as I mentioned before, we are not interested in single persons, but we're interested in collective patterns. So we just see areas, so to say, where many people post about something, like, for example, a natural disaster. We do not want to know who posts about that, and we do not want to know about why or what they want to achieve. And that's the ethical part in there. And then, of course, we have also created privacy by design guidelines for ourselves, and we have published them, of course, and that we consider in our research. So first of all, that's IT-based concerns. You have to have a safe IT system and so on. Then it's also managerial parts. For example, you have to have a data steward so that only certain persons have access to a database. Then, of course, we have all different kinds of anonymization and pseudonymization techniques that we use. So we can never see in our data any kind of clear identity of a person. That's just not the case. Yes, we can see, of course, the text that people wrote on social media. We do not see who that is.
Okay, this sort of laid the groundwork for my next question, which is you talk about social media and large structure of people, but at the same time, we're talking about how those people act at an individual level. So, would you say that this kind of modeling models sociological structures or psychological intentions?
Yeah, so I would mostly go for the sociological one, because understanding the psychology of why people post on social media is, I think, virtually impossible, because there are so many contextual factors and confounding factors, whereas the sociological part is a bit more clear. In the end, we observe patterns, how society that is represented to some degree, it's not always representative, but people express themselves on social media, how social media sees the world, right? And that's something where we try to derive statistical patterns. It's also hard to ground truth, right? Meaning we see social media a bit as a window to the world or as a mirror of society, depending on from where you're looking at.
Yeah.
And there, our assumption is that if we have a statistically robust sample of people who post about the same thing, yeah, we assume that this thing is true. And that's not always clear, and that's not always, the assumption does not always hold true, but that's how we try to get better in our research as well, to really investigate and evaluate and validate our results against external sources, and then with a good confidence, statistical confidence, be able to say, yes, we think there is something happening, there is a flood developing, and we need to take action there.
Going back on what you said, that if a lot of people post about something, it has a high probability of being true. How do you kind of one filter for kind of fake news, for example? Because we know that, especially in the past years, this has been happening a lot, and you would get a lot of posts that were promoting something that was obviously not true. And the second part of the question for me is related, but you can take them separately, is how do you sort of try to match or create a correspondence between what the digital actions of someone are and how do they reflect into the physical world, if you try to look at that?
So let me answer the first one first. So there is a saying that the internet is dead, meaning there are estimations which say 80% of all content that is currently posted on the internet is bot generated. So it's not human generated anymore, because the internet was thought as this like information platform, exchange platform, where everybody would have free access to to information, basically, which was a very nice one. Now we see that through the rise of AI, amongst others, there is a lot of generated information, meaning AI generated, that either is just there for information reasons. So, for example, weather bots, that's a fine thing, right? Like a computer software reporting in regular intervals about, I don't know, precipitation, sunshine, forecasts, and so on. But then, of course, there is a lot of vandalism on the internet, and that's a way different story, especially on social media. And you see, I talked about representativeness before. You see that different social media platforms have very different user groups. So it's not representative for all age groups or ethnic groups or socioeconomic statuses, but all of them are quite much biased. And for the fake news and bot detection, we usually use external libraries. It's not our field of research because it's a really hard thing to do, and if you do it, you need to do it full time. You cannot just say on the side, I invest 20% of my time into that. It's a really hard thing because nowadays, AI-generated information is not easily discernible from human-generated information anymore. 5 years ago, that was still easier. You could still, let's say, detect statistical patterns in AI-generated data that would tell you that it's generated. Nowadays, that's not true anymore. So that's something where we rely on other researchers and use their tools.
Okay. Let's move to... It gotten very serious, and I would like to take a step back. And yes, since Marginal is on art and science and geo, I will go a little bit into the art part. And we commonly work with researchers and start from research projects both in natural sciences and also in technologies. So I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about a project that we did last year, and I'm curious your take on it from the perspective of the AI. The project dealt with the fading landscape, basically how the natural landscape changed in front of our eyes, and more specifically how it changed because of the technological development. The project started actually in Rotterdam, and the port of Rotterdam, I found out during this project, is the main entry point for technological components in Europe. Everything comes through there, and then it spreads out. And part of the initial research was to pretty much like your networks of influence, was to map how the natural landscape changed along the routes of the trucks, for example, that left from the port of Rotterdam with electronic components. And particularly in Bucharest, we focused on a specific area that changed a lot in the past 20 years because there, it's close to the computer science faculty. So all the dorms are there and a lot of students that live there. So a lot of companies build IT campuses, tech campuses, and all kind of buildings there, which further affected the environment. So what we try to focus on was this concept of landscape amnesia, the changing landscape, and how we don't remember it, how it was long ago. And we worked with elderly people who we recorded their stories about the landscape changing. And we actually afterwards we recreated these landscapes via paintings and VR experiences. So my question is, in the context of AI and going back what you said to what you said about AI crunching data and relying on large numbers to see if something is true or not, basically, do you think there's any kind of future possibility where we could teach AI to look at this kind of marginal data, of this kind of sensitive data that is at the margins, at the fringes of the mainstream? And how could geo-local AI, geo-social AI, for example, handle this kind of data that are still important?
Yeah, so human-made environments have always been changing, right? So, for example, the world looked way different 100 years ago. We were dominated by, for example, factories as a result from the Industrial Revolution. And then this was built back a bit through, let's say, the electrification and computerization of many industries. And also the types of jobs we have, the types of goods we produce have changed a lot. And this always, of course, alters the landscape as well. And nowadays, we see data centers and skyscrapers and banks and shopping malls instead of factories, obviously, right? And farms. So I think this is a natural progress that continues and that will shape us for the future. As for how AI will be able to accommodate that, I would say the marginalized keyword is an important one. Because what's happening right now is that everybody, or most people in AI, try to analyze large-scale data sources. And there is a bit of an opinion that the larger the data source is, the better it is. Now, this is not always true, of course. So first of all, the training data sets that we're using are just so large because they are sometimes imprecise. So you always want to model a certain distribution in machine learning, right? And if you have a very good data set that exactly represents the process you want to investigate, you just need few data and it's easy to train your model. But then again, if you have something more messy, which is understanding social processes from different kinds of data, and then the data even are messy because social media data, why is somebody sitting down and creating a post? How are they expressing themselves? Language is imprecise, everything, right? So that's why you need these large types of data. On the other hand, if you have a specific process you want to investigate, a small data set could be sufficient. And that's where also I think AI research will go, because so far we have investigated a lot of foundation models. And one instantiation of foundation models are large language models like GPT, like Llama, like DeepSeek, and others. And they are basically able to generically answer all different kinds of questions. And the opposite would be, I have a very small model that is very good in answering a specific question, but cannot be transferred to other domains or use cases. And there, I think we're going to have a bit of a middle way to say ensemble learning or AI agents are this direction, where you say you have a number of models that an AI agent can pick and choose depending on the question you want to answer. And that's, I think, the avenue where your question is going to head as well.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting perspective, and yeah, it's in their name, large language models. But since they've become so mainstream, it's hard to think of any other alternative and going more specific on certain use cases. But yeah,
I think this is an economic necessity, really, because, for example, even the large-scale companies, Amazon, Meta, OpenAI, and so on, they have troubles getting their models trained for economic reasons. First of all, it's a question of money. So there are different numbers around, but it costs like hundreds of millions of dollars only for training the model once, like a large language model, like GPT. The second thing is you need a very specific hardware to do that. And that's basically graphics cards, like in gaming PCs, right? GPUs, graphical processing units. And these just don't exist much in the world. There is mostly one manufacturer, which is NVIDIA, and they just cannot serve the entire market. So last year, Meta only purchased 350,000 GPUs, which is a value of $3.5 billion US. Okay, so how often are they going to do that? Because once you buy them, they're outdated already. Second thing is, you're going to think at some point whether it's worth to really train your large model, or you're going to go for smaller ones and interchain them. And that's where I think the switch will come from. It's a sheer economic necessity, amongst others.
okay, yeah. Thank you for the very interesting perspective. But yeah, I think is a very nice way to think about the future, where even AI would get more customized and answer specific tasks. The other project I want to talk to you about, and it's another side I've been thinking about when hearing about Geo-social AI. It's a project it was called Cyber Body Systems. It was the continuation of a project called DigiSense, actually from Linz, led by Claudia Schnug, and it dealt with how digital transformation is implemented in businesses particularly, and how we can sort of try to navigate this gap between the physical world and the digital world when we have mainly physical processes like blue-collar jobs, like jobs that require manual input and so on, but all the trainings happen in the digital world. And what we did was to get technology experts with neuroscientists and with dancers to experiment with different kind of technologies and digital technologies and see how they embody the different aspects of the technology. And so my question is, how do you feel that Geo-social AI could sort of integrate this embodied experience?
So
talking about what I'm referring to is that you're mainly analyzing the digital traces that we want to leave, but humans move in the real world, see in the real world, sense in the real world. Do you see any kind of gap in between what is happening with the physical bodies versus the digital bodies, or are you addressing that in any way?
So no, I don't see a gap, because it's the same thing, right? It's just two different representations. One of them is what we share digitally, but we share digitally by doing what we do in physical space. So there is no gap from this point of view, at least. Just one example. Our second research strand, apart from analyzing social media data and others, is we use wearable sensor data. So, for example, we collect data through wearable sensors like watches or chest belts, such as electrodermal activity, heart rate variability, skin temperature, and others, so physiological parameters, to make conclusion on an emotion psychological process. In other words, we try to measure how people feel. In the simplest case, do they feel stressed or relaxed? And then we have just standard study cohorts, basically. Meaning, we have 50 people in our study. They would sign up, they have an opt-in agreement, and they say, I want to contribute to understand better what a city and what the mobility infrastructure actually is. And what we do there is, people would cycle through the city, and they would, in irregular intervals, exhibit so-called moments of stress. So they would experience stress. Mm-hmm. And then what we can do is to really link this stress back to the environment. In other words, if 50 participants have been crossing an intersection and 46 of those have a very strong stress reaction there, our assumption would be, or our hypothesis at least, that the environment is actually causing the stress. And this is what we're trying to verify, then talk to urban governments and try to ameliorate the situation in the mobility infrastructure. And that's exactly this interplay, right? Where you have the digital data that represents what you're doing and what you're feeling.
And how it's correlated to the physical environment around you.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think I'm gonna move to the ending section now, because I feel like this discussion could go on forever. But when we discussed yesterday, and this is the thing I thought about after we discussed yesterday evening after your presentation, when you said you don't have a lot to do with art. And my question for you is, do you have any questions for us?
So we're dealing a lot with a variety of terms. First of all, intelligence. Artificial intelligence, that's a bit hard to define already. Then the question is creativity. Like, for example, can AI be creative? And then there is this notion of progress through digital innovation. And all of those are interlinked, obviously. Pointed question, do you think from an artistic viewpoint, as you see AI now, but imagine like 5 to 10 years ago, it's going to progress, right? Is AI an artistic element that you can use, or is AI by itself creative, or how it's going to shape the artistic landscape?
I think artificial intelligence, large language models created a huge ripple effect in the art world in general. You can see from the strikes at Hollywood to how individual people react. But I think it's just a moment in time, and end of the day, AI is a tool. And what I hope, and I'm quite sure it will happen, is just like photography. When photography appeared, painters didn't have to do realistic painting anymore, photographic painting anymore. They were freed from that, and that allowed them to explore. And this is how surrealism and all the other currents from the 19th century appeared, the 20th century appeared. So from an artistic point of view, I think AI should be pretty much liberating for the art world. And on the other hand, going back to how you opened your question, I think that the differences between what is happening in the research world and what is happening in the artistic world, and how this kind of differences and difference in terms and difference in perspectives appear, I think this is actually the real problem we're facing nowadays. And I think this is going to be my personal conspiracy theory, but I think this kind of gap appeared due to the Industrial Revolution, where we needed to become very extremely well specialized in one task and one task alone, and we lost the overview. And I think that with the amount of data that we're creating nowadays, it's impossible for one person to be a new Leonardo da Vinci and manage several fields. But I think what we need to do is start learning together, start communicating, and going across fields and getting people from different fields to come up with their expertise and put it together to build something.
I would agree, and I would say that terms of intelligence and creativity can be somehow answered positively. Of course, there is debate, but also through what she said. But there is always another component to art, which is aesthetics. So, in very simple terms, what makes an art piece beautiful, or why do we like it, more or less, right? Is that something? I mean, it's a very emotional and subjective thing, obviously, right? Do you think that it can be represented through AI, meaning in the end you need to structure the characteristics of what is aesthetic? Do you think that can be done, or is it just like a random process that can come out or not?
That's actually a very good question, and I think it's one of the difficulties art world is facing today, because it's taking aesthetics as the end game of the artistic process, whereas aesthetics in the broader meaning of the term means knowing the world through your senses. It doesn't inherently mean something beautiful. It means a way of discovering what is around you. So if you think as aesthetics, for aesthetics as the process, not the end game, then it turns the problem on its head, and AI can definitely become a tool that lets you explore this kind of aesthetics approach to reality.
Yeah, then we go a little bit towards imagination as well, right?
Yeah,
The concept of imagination. And imagination has a lot of like different instantiations, so to say. Could be sensory images, could be propositional imagination, could be supposition, or even free association, where I just combine elements that have not been combined and just have the freedom of creating something new, right?
And it can be a hallucinations as well.
Absolutely. So is an hallucination probably creative or not?
I think this is the question we'll end with. But if people want to find out more, besides your website, which we will have in the descriptions, where people should look for you.
So first of all, we will put up a few links below the video. Second thing is our LinkedIn webpage is rather well curated. So just look for Geo-social artificial intelligence, and everything else you can find from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we'll come back with questions from our viewers probably.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.
Mike Nevers.